Hello and welcome to episode 207 of Prose. This week, define home and try to remember where you're going and why you're here. Instead of the usual introductions this week, let me simply say, hey, thanks for listening, thanks for being around. If you know of someone who might like these short tales, please share the show with those wonderful humans in your life. That would be greatly appreciated. With that quick little tidbit, let's get to the tales, shall we? This week, we have Where You Come From and Someplace Somewhere. Enjoy.
Where You Come From, a short story by Jared I. McGee. Clichés and canned adages are often quite problematic. The one that drove Robert particularly mental were actually two conflicting nuggets of knowledge that everyone loved to toss about. Cliché number one: you can never leave your home, and your home never leaves you. Cliché number two: once you leave home, you can never go back again. When he heard either of these, he always wanted to shout, rant, and rave. Luckily, he didn't usually encounter them being used in conjunction. They were antonymous, after all. Still, the two opposing concepts didn't make him feel any less isolated and alone moving through the world. To be sure, his Cajun South Louisiana hybrid drawl had lessened over his 10 years in LA, slowing and molding and evolving in the warmth of the California sun, but it was still there. Certain words and phrases still had their lilt, their swampy slowness. To be sure, the California kings and queens that he now tried his best to run with could peg him as an outsider any day, all day, even with his masked accent. The way he moved, ate, dressed, thought, the way he everythinged, screamed, "I am not one of you," and that certainly set him apart. The accent and the manner were two of a near infinite number of elements of Louisiana that just wouldn't say quit. They might be watered down a bit, but they definitely were not dissipating entirely. You can never leave your home, and your home never leaves you. Could actually not be more true for Robert. The yin to that yang, unfortunately, proved true for him as well. Admittedly, he didn't get down home to Marigold all too often these days, but he did get back for 10 days at Christmas time at the barest of bare minimums each and every year. Rolling back down into the swampland he called home, being cloaked in honeysuckle and cleansed by magnolia upon entering his zip code, it all made his heart swell and made him think maybe having left Marigold, Louisiana, his family in the South, was a monumental mistake. That feeling only continued to grow as he rolled up to the old Delacroix homestead, if that was a bit grandiose for a double wide on a little bit of land near the bayou. Hugs from his family saw that feeling burgeon. Waves from all the old neighbors, their eyes beaming with pride that the native son that had gone off to the land of magic had returned home, saw that feeling wax even further. That feeling of being really and truly home, and of really truly belonging, threatened to drown him right along with the honeysuckle and the magnolia. However, the inevitable requisite visits to old friends, stumblings into former classmates, run-ins with old church acquaintances, and general interactions with the population of Marigold quickly poisoned that feeling of belonging. Old friends were wasting away and only former shadows of themselves. Former high school classmates still talked about that one tackle that they made together that one time on the football field at that one game senior year. Church acquaintances treated him like some apostate prince that had done some awful something that had potentially damned him, and it was up to them to fight the armies of Satan for control of Robert's soul. In the Marigold public? The random woman in Piggly Wiggly casually tossing out a racial epithet while having a discussion with her 10-year-old daughter. The random man at the gas station railing against the evils of those damned liberals touting the gay mafia's agenda and simultaneously decreasing his food stamps and Medicaid. The random woman so extremely obese, but trying her hardest to make good decisions in the grocery store, therefore grabbing Sunny D in the place of orange juice. Her not knowing any better, and the store not having any better. The little boy complaining to his father that the library didn't have any new books that he'd not read. At every turn, Robert slammed into the hopelessness that was Marigold. Hopeless not because they were bad people. Hopeless because crippling poverty and horrific educational and occupational opportunities stripped them of hope. 3 to 4 days into his 10-day Christmas visit, Robert would be absolutely, utterly lost. If he wasn't at home in LA, and he wasn't at home in Marigold, then where the hell was home? 20-year-old him would have answered that question by saying that friends are where home is. But those friends changed. Some had evolved into responsible adults with real lives far more concrete than his own. Some had devolved into lesser versions of the fiery dreams they'd once been in high school and or college. 25-year-old him would have answered that question by saying that family is where home is, and, to an extent, 35-year-old him would agree. Though Marigold was a painful place these days, his family was still his North Star. The only thing was, his family was shrinking at an alarming rate. So very many of them had passed at this point. His North Star was getting dimmer and dimmer with each passing year. "29 through 34-year-old him would have answered that question by saying that one's true love is where home is. But 35-year-old him now openly guffawed and scoffed at that answer. Investment in someone else is always dangerous, and that investment rested wholly on the other person's willingness to invest themselves too, to recognize the investment of their partner, to, well, hell, to give enough of a shit to not cripple someone and burn their version of home and their imagined future down around them. Bad breakup? You could say that. When it came right down to it, 16-year-old Robert knew far better what home was than 35-year-old Robert did. Rudderless, sailless, in the dark. He could go off on played-out, unoriginal metaphors all day long. At the end of that day, though, the simple fact of the matter was that, again, he was lost. He was scared. He was more confused than the unsure teenager that had been so very self-critical. What an odd place to be. Coming back to that place so far down life's meandering path. Yeah. Cliches and canned adages are often quite problematic, and those two conflicting nuggets of knowledge that everyone loved to toss out were most problematic of all to Robert. You can never leave your home, and your home never leaves you. Once you leave home, you can never go back again. Two opposites, two truths. As Robert saw his family's double wide in his rearview mirror, bathed in red from his taillights, as he aimed his sedan's nose west toward the city where the angels sleep and the stars live, and that he fought so fucking hard to be in, he felt nothing. The emptiness disturbed him further. You can never leave your home, and your home never leaves you. Once you leave home, you can never go back again, but what happens when home does leave you? What happens when you can come back, but home has become something distorted and perverse? You become a ghost, hovering between realities, existing in the present but only being recognized as a phantasm of the past or a premonition of some skewed future or parallel possibility. He turned on a bass-heavy rap song to drown out the thoughts that threatened to overwhelm him. He eased down on the accelerator and sped up down the dirt road, heading west and hoping he might find home somewhere along the way. Thank you for listening to Where You Come From. All musical tracks in the background of this story come from freesounds.org. The musical tracks are all being used under CC 0 1.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication licenses.
Next up, stick around for a little story called Someplace Somewhere, where you'll meet Somewhere Man and be part of his journey.
Someplace, Somewhere, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. Somewhere Man could not quite get his plans together. He knew that he had places to be and great deeds to accomplish, journeys to undertake, ideas to engender, universes to move. But he couldn't quite remember where and when and how all that was supposed to come about. He knew that he had something important to do because he was still in his threadbare brown tweed suit. It was a bit raggedy, but it was his and it suited him. The fuzzy mahogany brown trousers, vest, and jacket were highlighted subtly with threads of gold and auburn and a slightly lighter brown, darker than sand but lighter than the surrounding pines. He had his faded brown leather dress shoes on, and he was even wearing his grandfather's pocket watch. The watch only came out for major doings, so something, indeed, was pressing. He checked the watch as he paced his front yard, wondering what on earth he'd forgotten. He scratched his balding head, only to realize that he was actually scratching his bedraggled bowler hat instead of his scalp. He shook his head and snickered at his own silliness. Lifting his hat, he took care of the offending itch and then went back to pacing. Somewhere Man's home was pretty nondescript. It was white, with white shutters and white roofing. There used to be extensive flower beds and orchard that ringed this Somewhere house, but they'd been waning toward non-existence when he'd moved in, and he'd forgotten to try to revive them. So, only a few rogue blooms and shoots came up anymore. He didn't often think about the splendid cemetery of plant life that surrounded him. He was too busy forgetting everything else that was going on in his life. Which was... what was it again? He knew he had something extremely important to do. Somewhere man heard an incessant yap, yap, yap coming from his front window. Beasley! That was one thing Somewhere Man didn't ever forget. Beasley, his best friend and the cutest beagle pup imaginable, was asking for food. Yes, Somewhere Man often got busy and did not walk Beasley as much as he would like, but Beasley was forgiving, and he never, ever pottied on the floor. Somewhere Man did not forget to feed Beasley. In fact, the schedule that he and Beasley had come up with for themselves together was the only tether on routine and reality that kept Somewhere Man from floating off into the mental ether that threatened to engulf him at any given moment on any given day. He made his way in, scratching the dog on the nape of his neck, just where he liked it, and went to get Beasley some food. The cabinets were absolutely stuffed with big bags of the dog's food because Somewhere Man knew full well that he would forget to buy more. So he bought hundreds of pounds every time he went to the market in the village. Since Beasley only ate about a cup a day, half a cup for breakfast and half a cup for dinner, this meant that the dog was never close to being out of his daily meals. This planning ahead and general consistency carried more meaning to Somewhere Man than all the hastily scrawled notes and all the penned pensives in all the world. Beasley was fed. Beasley was let out. Beasley was walked on a meandering walk where Somewhere Man got a bit lost because of staring into the clouds and thinking about what shapes they made. As they wandered, he picked up one blue jay feather and one cardinal feather, tucking the contrasting colors into the small band above the rim of his hat. That bit of color would do nicely for that thing he would be doing later. Thankfully, Beasley became insistent on changing their path and led him home before they got too far into the surrounding forests. The forests could be dangerous after all. Somewhere Man entered his house, letting Beasley off the leash. He went to feed and water Beasley, but he found that he'd already done that. So odd. He certainly didn't remember doing that at all. As he put Beasley's excess food back into its bin, Somewhere Man realized that he was hungry. Upon trying to remember the last time he ate, he quickly came to the conclusion that he absolutely did not know. So he made himself a cheese sandwich. White bread, white cheese, no condiments. That was his favorite. Not his favorite taste, but it was his favorite to make. It was quick and easy, and he didn't ever end up forgetting the makings for it on his stove or his counter or his bed or the bookshelf, like he did other, more intricate sandwiches or foodstuffs. His sandwich went rather quickly, and he fed the crusts to Beasley. The crusts were too rich for his tastes, and the little dog seemed to revel in getting a bit of special food from a real plate now and again. The act spoiled Beasley a bit, he knew, but he could not deny his friend the bit of joy that sharing brought. Somewhere Man washed his plate free from what few crumbs had made it onto the dish, staring out into the rather sizable backyard and up to the tree line that was moving ever closer to his property. He really would have to get around to beating the forest back just a bit one of these days. That, or his property would be overrun by young pines and oaks and spruces. There were worse things in the world, though. He stared and washed and stared. The circular motion he used to clean his dish was comforting to him. The dishcloth smelled a bit sour. He would really have to remember to do a load of laundry soon. If he remembered correctly, he was running low on both clothing and towels. Maybe that was why he was still in his tweed suit. Maybe he simply ran out of everyday clothes. But that just didn't seem right. It didn't feel right. Somewhere Man shrugged off the thoughts of chores, put his dish in the drying rack, and went to sit on his overstuffed brown sofa. He giggled as Beasley jumped up to join him, both because the affection from the dog made him happy, and because, as he himself plopped down, his suit acted as camouflage. Somewhere Man could hide in plain sight if he were wearing his tweed while relaxing there. He felt himself begin to doze, Beasley's rhythmic breathing and warm body lulling him to sleep while the mid-afternoon peeked around the cheap blue curtains he had hanging in his parlor. Somewhere Man woke to birds singing their last songs of the day, the sun just beginning its descent behind the tall trees in the west. He leapt up, apologized to Beasley for the start, and zipped back out the front door to his front lawn. He was so very late, after all. He knew that he had places to be and great deeds to accomplish, journeys to undertake, ideas to engender, universes to move. But man, he couldn't quite remember where and when and how all that was to come about. He knew that he had something important to do because he was still in his threadbare brown tweed suit. His grandmother used to tell him that dressing nicely was a mark of good character and good planning. "Somewhere, man," she'd say, "you especially should always dress well. If not, goodness knows you're apt to miss your own funeral." They all thought it was so funny back then. He stood staring out into the forest, watching as the sun continued its climb down from the heavens. He smiled at the beauty and shivered as the temperature began to drop, bringing with it darkness. Somewhere Man was afraid of the dark. He was afraid of being alone. The crunching of wheels on the dirt and rocks of the path to his house brought him out of his own mind. He looked up to see a sable carriage, seemingly pulled by no horses. When it had come just past him, the carriage stopped, and the door closest him swung open. The interior was too dark for him to pick out details, but a woman's husky velveteen voice danced out toward him. "Somewhere, man, you're late for our appointment. I fear we must move along rather quickly now." He was confused, but she seemed quite confident. She seemed to know what was going on. So he went to get into the waiting carriage. He made his way up to the steps to Beasley's plaintive whines and barks coming to him from all the way across the yard and through the walls of his home. Thank you for listening to Someplace Somewhere. All noises and musical tracks in the background of this story are from freesound.org. The sounds and the musical tracks are all being used under CC 0, 1.0, Universal Public Domain Dedication licenses. Well, now that does it for prose this week, but it only begins the adventures of Fail, and potentially only begins the adventures of Somewhere Man. I truly hope that you enjoyed these stories this week, and I look quite forward to continuing the journey with you all. We will be back together in 2 weeks' time. Until then, as always, thank you for listening. Love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is always stranger than fiction.